Margaret sat quietly in her living room, the dim glow of a lamp brushing against her tired face. Outside, rain tapped gently on the window, as if reminding her of the time that had passed. The house felt larger than ever large, but empty. Every corner held a memory, a whisper of laughter, a sound of children running, and her husband's warm voice echoing from years ago. It had been a beautiful life once. Not perfect, not rich, but full of love. Margaret and William had built their small world from nothing. William worked long hours at a steel plant, his hands rough but his smile gentle. Margaret worked 2 part-time jobs just to help pay the bills. Together, they faced everything: bills, sickness, and sleepless nights with quiet strength. Their love wasn't loud, but it was unbreakable. Then came Michael. The day he was born, Margaret cried with joy. She looked at that tiny face and whispered, "You'll have a better life than we did, my boy." And when Emma arrived 2 years later, Margaret felt complete. A son and a daughter, her whole world in her arms. Life was not easy, but Margaret never complained. She cooked, cleaned, cared for the children, and supported William through every hardship. Their house was small, but filled with warmth. She dreamed only of one thing: that her children would one day be happy, successful, and proud. But time has its own way of testing love. William started falling ill when he was just 52. It began with fatigue, short breaths, and hospital visits. The doctors said his heart was weak. Margaret tried to stay strong, even as she sold her jewelry and borrowed money to pay for his treatments. Every night, she sat beside his hospital bed, whispering prayers he couldn't always hear. He would smile weakly and say, "Promise me, Maggie, you'll stay strong for the kids." And she always answered, "I promise, Will. I'll take care of everything." When William passed away, the world around her collapsed, but she didn't. Not in front of her children. She buried her pain deep inside, put on a brave face, and carried on. She had no choice. She was both mother and father now. After the funeral, William's elderly mother, Grandma Evelyn, moved in with them. The old woman was frail, forgetful, and needed constant care. Margaret did everything, feeding her, giving her medicine, helping her walk. Nights turned into mornings without rest, but she never stopped smiling. Michael and Emma were growing up fast. They didn't notice the deep lines forming on their mother's face, or the tired way she sat down every night after work. All they saw was a strong mother who made everything seem easy. They didn't know the sleepless nights, the unpaid bills, or the quiet tears that fell when no one was watching. When Michael turned 18, he got into a good college. Margaret couldn't afford it, but she found a way. She took another job, working extra hours cleaning offices at night. When Emma wanted to study fashion, Margaret supported her too. Even though she had to cut down her own meals to save money. Years passed, and the children began drifting away. Michael moved to the city for his career. Emma became busy with her social life. Phone calls became shorter, visits rarer. Margaret never complained, she just told herself that her children were busy building their futures, the very futures she had sacrificed everything for. Then one cold evening, Grandma Evelyn passed away peacefully in her sleep. Margaret stood alone beside another grave, holding a flower in her trembling hand. The memories of losing William came rushing back. Her heart felt heavy, but her eyes stayed dry. She whispered softly, "You're home now, Mama, rest well." That night, she returned to her silent house. The rain had started again, and the ticking clock was the only sound. She looked at the family photos on the wall: William, Grandma, Michael, and Emma, and smiled faintly through the pain. Margaret walked to the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered against the mist. She thought of her children, somewhere far away, chasing dreams she had built for them. She didn't expect them to call. She just prayed they were happy. Still, something inside her whispered a loneliness she couldn't silence. She missed the laughter, the noise, the warmth of family. She missed being needed. And as the night deepened, she whispered to herself, maybe this is what love truly means, giving everything and expecting nothing back. She didn't know it yet, but her story was only beginning. A story of love, loss, and a mother's heart that refused to break. The months after Grandma Evelyn's passing were quiet, almost too quiet. Margaret tried to fill her days with small routines, watering the plants, cleaning every corner of the house, and baking the same apple pie William used to love. But every sound in that home seemed to echo her loneliness. Michael rarely called now. When he did, his voice felt rushed, mechanical, like a man always checking his watch. "I'm doing fine, Mom," he would say. "Work's just crazy. I'll visit soon." Soon never came. Emma called sometimes too, her tone cheerful but distant. "Mom, I wish you could see my new apartment. It's beautiful. Oh, and I got promoted." Margaret smiled, her voice trembling with pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." But when the call ended, silence swallowed her again. One Sunday morning, Margaret decided to clean the attic. She opened old boxes full of memories, baby clothes, school drawings, photo albums. Each picture told a story. First birthdays, school awards, Christmas mornings. She ran her fingers over William's handwriting on an old card. "To my Maggie," the heart of our home. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "You'd be proud of them, Will. They've grown so much." But deep inside, she knew he would also ask the same question she asked herself every night. Why don't they come home anymore? A few weeks later, Michael finally visited. He looked different, older, busier, and less patient. His expensive suit, shiny phone, and hurried steps made Margaret's heart ache. He hugged her quickly and said, "Mom, I can't stay long. I've got meetings later." Margaret smiled warmly. "That's all right, honey. I just made your favorite soup." He nodded, distracted, scrolling through his phone. As they sat at the table, Margaret tried to ask about his life, his wife, his little boy, Noah. But Michael's answers were short. "Sophia's fine. Noah's growing fast. You should come visit sometime, Mom." She wanted to say yes. She wanted to ask when. But she just nodded, afraid of sounding needy. After he left, Margaret sat staring at his empty cup, the spoon resting untouched. The house grew silent again, as if even the walls sighed. A few days later, Emma visited too. Her perfume filled the air, her laughter bright but shallow. "Mom, you really need to redecorate. This place feels old." Margaret smiled faintly. "It's been like this since your father was here." Emma shrugged. "Yeah, maybe that's the problem." That night, when Emma left, Margaret walked to the window and watched her daughter's car disappear down the street. She whispered, "Drive safe, my girl." Then she turned and looked at the empty chair beside hers, the one William used to sit in, and felt the same sharp ache in her chest. Months passed. Seasons changed. Margaret's hair grew grayer, her back a little weaker, but she still managed to keep the house spotless. Every corner still held the warmth of her love. She cooked dinners for one. She talked to photos as if they could answer. One winter evening, a letter arrived. It was from the bank. Her savings account was almost empty. She had spent most of it paying off old debts, bills, repairs, even some of Michael's college loans that he never knew about. Margaret sighed softly. "It's all right," she told herself. "As long as they're doing fine." Later that night, she sat by the window again, the rain falling gently outside. She remembered the nights William held her hand and told her everything would be okay. Now there was only silence. She whispered, "You told me to stay strong, Will, but sometimes it's hard." The next morning, she woke up early and decided to visit Michael's family. She bought gifts for Noah, a small toy car and a sweater she had knitted. The bus ride took hours, but her heart felt light. When she reached the house, Sophia opened the door. Her smile was polite, but her tone was cold. "Oh, Margaret, we weren't expecting you." Michael appeared behind her, surprised. "Mom, you should have called first." Margaret smiled awkwardly. "I didn't want to bother you. I just missed you all." They let her in, but the air felt heavy. Sophia's sighs, Michael's impatience, it was all too obvious. Noah, her grandson, ran to her arms, giggling. "Grandma!" Margaret's heart melted. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I missed you, my angel."
But the joy didn't last. After dinner, Sophia said quietly, "Margaret, you really shouldn't take long trips at your age. We worry." Michael added, "Yeah, Mom. It's just, we're really busy. Maybe next time, call before coming." Those words cut deeper than they realized. Margaret nodded gently, holding her smile until she got home. The moment the door closed behind her, tears finally came. She sat down on the floor, clutching her shawl, whispering, "I just wanted to see you." That night, she took out an old photo of William and said, "They don't mean to hurt me. They're just living their lives." But her voice cracked halfway through. Outside, thunder rolled and rain poured down. Margaret stayed by the window, eyes filled with quiet sorrow. Somewhere in that storm, she realized her children no longer needed her. They had outgrown her love, her warmth, her sacrifices. Still, she whispered softly, "Even if they forget me, I'll keep loving them." That's what a mother does. Didn't know it yet, but soon life would test that love in ways she never imagined. Winter had always been Margaret's favorite season. The crisp air, the quiet snowfall, the way everything seemed to slow down and rest. But this year, it felt different. Cold. Lonely. Her knees ached more than usual, and her hands trembled when she reached for the kettle. She had always prided herself on keeping her health in check, staying active, but now, every step felt like a chore. Michael had called earlier in the week. His voice was the same as always, distant, distracted. "Mom, I've been really busy, but don't worry, we're okay." "I understand," Margaret had replied softly, her words careful, as if each one might break something fragile. "You need to come visit us more, Mom. You can stay with us for a while, just to be sure everything's all right." But Margaret could hear the unspoken message in Michael's words. "Don't bother us unless it's important." She had promised she'd visit. But the days slipped by, and the weather worsened. And somehow, she never found the strength to make the journey. One afternoon, Margaret felt dizzy as she made her way to the kitchen. She gripped the counter tightly, trying to steady herself. A wave of nausea hit, and for a moment, the room spun around her. It wasn't the first time. There had been other dizzy spells, other small signs of something being wrong. But Margaret always brushed them off. After all, she was strong. She had to be. She leaned against the counter, taking slow, steady breaths, waiting for the vertigo to subside. She knew that if she told anyone, Michael, Emma, or anyone, they'd worry. And Margaret hated worrying them. But deep down, she knew that time was running out. It wasn't just her health that was failing. It was the connection with her children. They were so far away, emotionally. The long talks, the heartfelt moments, they were gone, replaced with quick calls and busy schedules. Every gesture of love had been met with the feeling of obligation, not affection. A week later, Margaret's world tilted again. She received an email from the doctor's office, reminding her about an upcoming checkup. It was then she realized how much time had passed. She hadn't been to a doctor in over a year. Her health, her well-being, had she been ignoring it all this time? The doctor's appointment wasn't far, but Margaret didn't want to face it. She didn't want to know if there was something more seriously wrong. But she couldn't keep ignoring the truth. She called Michael's office, but his assistant told her he was in meetings all day. A voice in the back of her head screamed for her to just go, to tell him what she needed. But she hung up before the words could escape her lips. What would I say? She wondered. How can I ask for something that no longer feels like it's mine to ask for? The following Sunday, Margaret sat in her living room, holding a letter she had received from the bank. It was a reminder to pay the overdue rent on the storage unit where she had kept old family photos and memorabilia. But this time, something broke inside her. The money she had spent over the years, the endless generosity, where had it gone? Why had she given so much, without receiving anything in return? That afternoon, after an agonizing silence, Margaret called Emma. The conversation was brief. Emma's voice, though still sweet, held a layer of impatience. Mom, I'm sorry, I'm swamped with work. We'll talk soon. The soon that never came. As Margaret sat on her old armchair, staring out at the dimming sky, a deep sadness washed over her. She had given so much of herself, her love, her money, her time, hoping it would bring them closer. Instead, it had pushed them farther away. She stood up, slowly. The ache in her joints was becoming unbearable, but she ignored it. It wasn't about her pain, it was about them. Her children. Her love for them was the one thing she could still hold on to. But then, she asked herself, what was the point of loving someone who didn't even want to be loved? The thoughts lingered as Margaret walked through the house, pausing to touch old photographs and relics of a life she had worked so hard to build. But now it felt as if everything was crumbling around her. That evening, she sat by the fireplace, a cup of tea in her hands, when she heard a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. But when she opened the door, her heart sank. It was Emma, standing there with a hesitant look on her face. "I came to check on you, Mom. Is everything okay?" Emma's voice was soft, but there was an edge of guilt behind her words. Margaret couldn't look at her. She nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. "Of course, dear. Everything's fine," Margaret lied. But Emma didn't seem convinced. She stepped inside and sat beside her, the silence thick between them. Margaret's heart twisted. She had spent so many years caring for them, nurturing them, loving them unconditionally. Yet here she was, sitting in her own house, feeling more like a guest than a mother. "Mom," Emma began, her voice trembling slightly. "I know things have been distant lately. I don't know how to talk to you about it. I guess I was scared. I didn't want to be a burden to you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. A burden? She had never once felt like a burden to them. But in that moment, she understood. They had all been pushing her away without even realizing it. "I'm not a burden, Emma," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "I've always been here for you." Emma hesitated before reaching out and taking her mother's hand. For a moment, everything stood still. The world outside disappeared, and it was just them two women who had once shared everything. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry," Emma said, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to be what you needed me to be." Margaret squeezed her hand gently. "You're not the one who's been lost," she thought. "I have. I've been lost for so long that I didn't even notice." But in that quiet, aching moment, Margaret realized she was no longer the same woman. She had spent so much time bending herself to fit into their lives, but now, she needed to reclaim what had been taken from her. Her love, her identity, her strength. It was time to find it again. As Emma left that night, Margaret stood at the door, watching her daughter disappear into the darkness. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel angry. She didn't feel resentful. She just felt tired. And yet, something inside her stirred a sense of clarity. Tomorrow, she would call her doctor. Tomorrow, she would stop letting fear control her. And tomorrow, she would stop waiting for her children to remember her. She was no longer waiting. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, painting long golden lines across Margaret's living room. The warmth of the light felt comforting, but it also exposed the quiet emptiness that had become her daily companion. She moved slowly, pouring herself a cup of tea. The sound of the kettle whistling was one of the few familiar noises left in her home. The clock ticked steadily in the background, tick-tock, a rhythm that seemed to echo her own fading strength. Margaret had called her doctor that morning, just as she promised herself she would. The appointment was scheduled for Thursday. But deep down, she knew the visit wouldn't just be about her health. It would be about facing what she had been avoiding for far too long, the truth that time was running short. After breakfast, she sat at her writing desk at an old oak table her late husband, Daniel, had built decades ago. The surface was scratched and worn, but it still held the faint scent of varnish and memory. She opened her drawer and pulled out a faded leather notebook. Inside were pages filled with old grocery lists, family recipes, and the beginnings of letters she had never mailed.
She took a deep breath, uncapped her pen, and began to write. "To my children, Michael and Emma." Her hand trembled as the words formed on the page. "By the time you read this, you might be too busy to notice I'm gone, and that's all right. I understand now that love doesn't always mean presence. Sometimes it means letting go quietly, without demanding to be seen." A tear rolled down her cheek, smudging the ink slightly. "I've spent most of my life trying to make your worlds easier, softer, more beautiful. I gave what I had: money, time, patience, love, because I wanted you both to have the life I never did. But I realize now, I gave so much that I forgot to keep anything for myself." She paused, staring out the window. The winter snow was melting. Drops of water slid down the glass, like tears the sky didn't want to hold. "If I ever made you feel guilty for not being here, I'm sorry. That was never my intention." I just wanted to be remembered not as a burden, but as the woman who stood behind every good thing in your life." Margaret set her pen down and covered her face with her hands. The silence of the house felt heavier now. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. Then, almost without thinking, she reached for another page. "To Daniel, my love, my partner," her voice cracked as she whispered the words out loud. "It's been years since you left, but I still talk to you every night. Sometimes I wonder if you can hear me the way I call your name when the pain gets too heavy, or how I still make your favorite soup when it rains. You were my calm, Daniel, my reason to keep believing in love. I wish you were here to tell me I did enough." She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself cry not for the pain, but for the release. She wasn't angry at her children anymore. She was simply free. When she finally looked up, she saw the framed photos on the mantle: her wedding day, the kids' birthdays, Christmas mornings. Each picture was a small lifetime, frozen in joy. Margaret stood up, gathered the letters, and placed them neatly inside an envelope. She didn't write any address on it. Just a single word: "For when I'm gone." Later that evening, Emma called again. Her tone was softer this time, uncertain but genuine. "Mom, are you okay? You sounded tired last time." Margaret smiled faintly. "I'm all right, darling. Just a little tired. But I'm finally taking care of myself now." "That's good," Emma said. There was a pause, then a sigh. "I've been thinking about visiting this weekend. Would that be okay?" The question pierced Margaret's heart like sunlight through a storm. "Of course, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'd like that very much." After hanging up, she sat back in her chair, holding the letter in her lap. She knew she might never need to send it now. Perhaps it had already served its purpose to unburden her soul. Outside, the snow stopped falling. The night was calm, the moon bright against the clouds. Margaret lit a small candle by the window and whispered, "Thank you, Daniel, for still keeping me company." For the first time in years, she felt peace settle into her chest. The kind that comes not from being loved, but from loving deeply without expectation. And as the candle flickered, Margaret closed her eyes. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she would face it not as a forgotten mother, not as a lonely widow, but as a woman who finally found her own worth. It was Saturday morning when Emma finally parked her car outside her mother's house. The driveway was half covered with fallen leaves, and the once white picket fence had faded to a soft gray. For a moment, she just sat there, hands still on the steering wheel, her heart pounding harder than she expected. She hadn't been home in months. Each time she thought about visiting, something always came up: a meeting, a deadline, or just that quiet voice inside whispering, "Not today." But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way her mother's voice had trembled on the phone, or maybe, deep down, it was guilt finally catching up with her. Emma stepped out of the car and looked at the house. The curtains were drawn halfway, and through the window she could see the faint glow of a lamp, the same old lamp her father used to fix every winter. The air smelled of pine and rain. It felt heavy, yet comforting. When Margaret opened the door, she froze for a second. Her eyes widened, then softened with disbelief. "Emma?" "Hi, Mom," Emma whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth, tears instantly filling her eyes. "You came," Emma nodded and stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her mother. It wasn't one of those light, polite hugs they'd shared in the past. It was tight, long, the kind that carries all the unspoken words between two hearts that had been apart for too long. Margaret didn't say anything. She just held on as if afraid that if she let go, her daughter might disappear again. After a while, they moved inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. On the table was a half-empty cup of tea, and beside it, the leather notebook Margaret had written in days ago. Emma's eyes drifted toward it, but she said nothing. They sat together on the couch. Silence filled the space between them, not awkward, just quiet, healing. Margaret finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You look tired, sweetheart." Emma smiled weakly. "Work's been crazy. And life, you know." Margaret nodded. "I understand." For the next hour, they talked. About little things: the weather, Emma's job, the neighbor's new dog. But beneath every sentence, there was something else, a weight neither of them wanted to touch yet. Then, out of nowhere, Emma said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Margaret froze. For what? The night passed peacefully. For the first time in years, the house wasn't silent. It was alive, filled with laughter, whispers, and the sound of love finding its way back. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees gently, as if blessing the home that had waited so long for this reunion. And upstairs, as Margaret watched her children sleep, she whispered a silent prayer. "Thank you, God, for bringing them back before it was too late." The morning sun rose quietly over the small town, casting a pale gold glow through Margaret's kitchen window. The air was still the kind of stillness that feels peaceful, but carries something heavy underneath. Margaret was already awake. She stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, just like she promised. The smell of butter and maple syrup filled the room, blending with the sound of soft music playing from an old radio. For a few moments, she forgot about the doctor's appointment, the letters, and the quiet ache in her chest. For a few moments, she was just mom again. Emma came down first, her hair still messy from sleep. "Morning, Mom," she said softly. Margaret smiled. "Morning, sweetheart. Sit down, breakfast's ready." A few minutes later, Michael appeared, yawning and stretching his arms. "Smells amazing, Mom. How long's it been since we had one of your breakfasts?" Margaret laughed gently. "Too long, honey. Far too long." They all sat together, the sound of forks and soft laughter filling the air. Margaret watched them both, really watched them the way a mother does when she wants to memorize everything before time takes it away. Emma glanced at her mother, noticing the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her cup. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" Margaret hesitated. "Just a little tired. You know me never could sleep much when the house is full." Michael chuckled. "Yeah, you always waited up for us. Remember prom night? You didn't go to bed until sunrise." Margaret smiled. "I was making sure my son made it home." Safi's warmth in her voice made Emma's heart tighten. There was something fragile in her mother's tone, something she hadn't heard before. After breakfast, Michael offered to clean up, and Emma went out to the porch with her coffee. The morning breeze carried the scent of wet leaves and distant rain. She looked around. The same old swing set from their childhood still stood in the yard, rusted and leaning, but still there. She smiled at the memories, then frowned as she noticed a small pile of medical papers sitting on a side table inside, near her mother's reading chair. She walked over, curiosity turning quickly into dread. There, in black letters, was her mother's name: Margaret Dawson, Oncology Department, Steady Luke's Hospital. Emma's heart stopped. She read the date just 2 weeks ago. Her hands began to shake. "Mom?" she called softly. Margaret turned from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. "Yes." Emma held up the paper, her voice trembling. "What is this?"